This episode is sponsored by Voluntero, the volunteering management platform that helps you spend less time lost in spreadsheets and drowning in emails and more time developing your volunteering program and delivering impact. Whether you're coordinating 20 volunteers or 20,000 volunteers, Voluntero makes it simple to onboard, train, deploy, communicate, and report all in one easy-to-use platform. Today's episode of the Time for Impact podcast is proudly sponsored by Investing in Volunteers, the UK's quality standard for good practice in volunteer management. Stay tuned to hear more about how IIV helps organisations create great volunteer experiences later in the show. Hi everyone, and welcome to this latest edition of the Time for Impact podcast. And Matt and I, this is Chris Wade speaking, I should say, shouldn't I? My co-host Matt is also with us. Hello Matt, how are you?
Hey Chris, I am very good, thank you.
And I think it's fair to say Matt and I are pretty excited about our conversation today before it's even started, so no pressure. Our guest today, we always try to bring innovative thinkers and also thought leaders from across the sector who have an influence and hopefully a vision around volunteering. And today's guest is Kate Lee OBE from NCVO, an organisation, of course, I know very, very well, and I'm sure you all do as well. And the new, still fairly new, Chief Executive of NCVO. And we thought it'd be really nice to have Kate come along and join us and, amongst other things, give us a bit of an insight. I know it's very early days, Kate, but an insight into your vision for not just for NCVO, but also, perhaps more importantly for this podcast, your vision for some of the challenges that we face around volunteering and where you think volunteering should be headed over the coming tenure of your time at NCVO, I guess. But let's start with something far more easy than that. Many of our listeners will know who you are, Kate, but tell us a bit about yourself. We're always interested to know how people ended up in their positions and their journey, particularly in relation to volunteering. And I know you have quite a history in the sector. And then, of course, because something like 25% of our listeners are outside the UK, it would be good to explain who NCVO are as well. Anyway, first of all, welcome, Kate.
Thank you. Well, thank you for inviting me. My goodness, my career trajectory to date. So I think that probably the seminal moments in my career, particularly in relationship to volunteering, are probably that I went to university in Sheffield and did a public sector and politics degree. And as part of that, I did a work placement over the summer in the NHS and decided that the public sector just wasn't for me. I didn't really like it. I always say it's the naivety of youth that I did one job in the entire UK public sector and decided that the entire thing just didn't really suit me. And one of my professors at the time said, had I thought about charities? And I didn't really know very much about charities at all, but I had an opportunity in my final year to study some charity laws, some governance stuff, looked at some issues around fundraising. So it was great. So when I graduated, applied for a role with British Red Cross and I got my very first job, and I always say this was really seminal for me, my very first job as a manager at the age of 21. I managed a group of 12 volunteers delivering a service at the time called Fire Victim Support, and I was a community service manager at Red Cross. And I really always say that cutting my teeth as a manager by managing volunteers was absolutely, I credit a huge amount of the early success of my career to that. So I think working out how to manage volunteers that were a lot older than me, learning your line management skills with people that you don't pay. You've got to really understand about their motivations and what kind of brings them to work and what keeps them and retains them. And I think learning those skills from my very, very first job in volunteering really honed my skills as a manager and a leader from day one in that organisation. I really only went to Red Cross for a year while I decided what it was I wanted to do. And that organisation is outstandingly good at retention. And 17 years later, I left Red Cross as the deputy chief exec and director of strategy, UK and international strategy, which was a fantastic opportunity. And then I went to be a CLAW Social Leadership Fellow. I did that full time for a short while, and then went to Myton Hospice in the West Midlands. And really interesting mix, really. Red Cross, obviously, an organisation at the time, 35,000 volunteers, delivering a huge range of services across the UK. I went to the hospice, I went to work regionally in that very local, locally loved charity, about 1,000 volunteers at the hospice as well. And I left the hospice in 2010. I was chief exec there, and I left to become chief exec of Young Lives versus Cancer. I wanted to get back into a national charity, and thoroughly enjoyed that role. Absolutely loved it. Again, organisation with a good cadre of volunteers, working in quite specific roles, which was really interesting. Kind of less volunteers, a more in-depth and quality offer, higher levels of training and development rather than maybe some of the transitional volunteering that I was used to. And then left there in 2000 and went to Alzheimer's Society, and I started at Alzheimer's Society on the 1st of March 2020. So 4 days. I got 4 days in the office. 4 days in the office before we went into lockdown, and I didn't actually meet my board of trustees in person for 2 years. So just actually an incredible time to join that organisation. Really amazing. We did a big transformational change. We delivered lots of cultural change stuff. It was a challenging organisation when I joined, dealing with lots of issues around culture and thinking about things like positioning of volunteers within the organisation. Were they a essential part of the organisation like they had been at Red Cross? Were they a nice to have? We really upped the number of volunteering services during COVID, Alzheimer's Society, but it also flagged some cracks in some of our processes around use of volunteers. And really exercised there by things like how do you use volunteers that come forward as part of corporate partnerships, so businesses that want you to provide a volunteering opportunity for their members of staff, which is really hard, and I know a lot of charities wrestle with. So stayed there until last summer, had a glorious summer off, and then started here at the National Council for Voluntary Organisations at the beginning of October. And this is an infrastructure body, so I don't know how I feel about that word yet. Not quite got my head around.
Yeah, that's a whole other debate. But infrastructure, architecture, I don't know.
We sit over or under the kind of body of UK registered charities, the kind of support to the whole of civil society. We've got about 17,000 member charities and growing, who we represent. We do a lot of work and the development of those member organisations and what they need to function really effectively. We do a lot of government lobbying and campaigning. So thinking like some of the lobbying bodies that work for business or in some of the other sectors, we do the same kind of role, but for charities and infrastructure here. So training, consultancy, lots of facilitation across the sector, connections, building networks. So interesting job for me now, over 30 years in the sector, over 15 years as being a chief exec. It's been really interesting to kind of put my money where my mouth is and move into this job, because I've moaned a lot about problems with the sector and now I feel they're my responsibility to sort out. So it serves me right, but absolutely loving it.
I once got told off by one of your predecessors, Sir Stuart Effrington, for calling NCVO the Road Haulage Association for Charities. But it seemed right to me.
Yeah, I'm getting more CBI, I'm getting more, some of those big influential bodies, but maybe we've just got to get back into that space.
So I don't want you to have to relive the interview for NCVO, but I imagine that there was a driving influence for you after all these years in sort of operational service kind of led charities to, I think as you hinted, presumably you saw some things that weren't quite working and you wanted to fix them. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think a few things really. I had the absolute best time at Alzheimer's Society, an incredible organisation. And I think when I left there, I felt like what I'd wanted to achieve there, I'd done. I like big transformational changes. I like to take organisations that have got bags of potential but they're not achieving that, and really work on kind of culture and the strategy and the financials, and really think about how you pull those together to create the best possible organisation it can be within the limitations and frustrations that it's got. And NCVO had lots of that potential. I also, if I was honest, I'd done 5 years as a chief executive in palliative care, 5 years as a chief executive in children's cancer, and 5 years as a chief executive in dementia. And I wanted a bit of a break from health, but it was really important to me that I stay in a cause that I'm madly passionate about. And I am madly passionate about the UK voluntary sector. I've never worked anywhere else, and I'm not sure I ever will.
Me neither.
I am its chief cheerleader. That is the most exciting part of being chief exec for NCVO, is I get to be chief cheerleader of the whole of UK civil society, and that has to be the best job in the world.
You should change your job title, your business card, to cheerleader in chief. I think that'd be quite innovative.
I want to build on the cheerleader theme, though. Is that a key part of the role of NCVO as well? Like, what do you see the role of NCVO in that sector as part of that infrastructure, and how does that link to your kind of leadership of that?
So I think it is a really important part, actually. I think this sector I genuinely, truly believe it is absolutely phenomenal. And every day I'm at NCVO, I am just learning more about quite how phenomenal it is. It is huge and it's powerful, and its combined wealth and impact is beyond measure, but we are not well coordinated. And the other thing is that we still, after all these years, lack confidence as a sector to stand up for ourselves and say, this is actually how important we are. You can survive without us. We are holding together the fabric of social cohesion and civil society. And in some places, we're the only thing holding it together.
Yeah. And getting more important, right?
Yeah, much more important as the world becomes more divisive, more divided, that polarization of debate, communities falling apart. We cannot let that continue. And civil society is the answer, because with the best will in the world, some of our governments and some of our commercial organizations are the reason some of those communities are falling apart. So we are the answer, and we should take absolute pride in that. And so I'm not being naive. The sector faces huge challenges, but I think it is really important that it does have a cheerleader that is confident to say, hey, you don't treat us like that. Actually, you couldn't cope without us. So I think that is a really important role for NCVO as well, which is to be an advocate, telling a positive story. I know there's loads of challenges for chief execs across the sector at the moment. Colleagues on their knees. I know burnout is a significant problem, but these are also highly privileged jobs in the best sector, in my mind, in the world. And, tough, and they are hard. I was saying to some chief execs last week, we were talking about survival tips. How have I survived 15 years as a chief exec and I still love the job every single day? And I was saying, these are survival tips, because we are fighting a battle here. We're fighting against inequality and oppression and unfairness and social injustice and the impact on the climate. And it's not surprising you're exhausted, because you're fighting every day. And we need to be talking more about what are the ways that chief execs can survive some of that and still be courageous leaders they need to be in order to make the world a better place, without just feeling burnt out and fed up, really, and just like it's all worthless. The saddest thing is, chief exec losing their passion or their activism and what brought them here in the first place. So I think we do need a lot more positive stories about how incredible this sector is, and people that aren't shy to tell them.
Yeah, it's interesting early in what you just said there around coordination of the sector as well, obviously, which is at least in part, the role of NCVO. And I was just wondering from how you feel about that from a volunteering perspective, because I suppose I'm old enough, but I was closely involved in the merger of NCVO and Volunteer in England way back when the coalition government really kind of pulled a lot of the money out of infrastructure in the UK. How you feel, where you feel that the NCVO's role is going forward in trying to sort of bring some coordination and bring some leadership into the world of volunteering in England. Of course, there are Volunteer Scotland, CVA, Volunteer Now, etc. And NCVO has also been slightly unique because it's kind of doing the volunteering bit and the rest of the sector. And I know it's very early days, but have you got any sort of thoughts where you see NCVO sort of leading the charge in kind of pulling some of that together? Especially, I suppose, thinking that there's been other stuff that happened in recent years. There's Leading the Futures group, there's the Big Help Out, and the stuff that sort of sits somewhere, good stuff, but sits somewhere other than the infrastructure bodies, and what the role of infrastructure is in driving the volunteering sector forward.
Yeah, so my general sense is that there are so many, it's not only volunteering, there are lots and lots of topics across the sector where there's tons and tons of good work going on. So this morning I've been spending some time looking at those organisations that are working in the protection of civil space, for example, protecting about the rights of protest, or all sorts of different kind of aspects to do with the rights of registered charities, the protection of our charitable status, regulation in that space. And that's kind of lawyers and groups like Liberty, but just loads of different organisations in that space. And I was talking to them and I was saying one of the issues I think in the sector is we have some absolutely superb musicians, but we struggle to pull together an orchestra. And so I think the role of NCVO going forward in a range of topics, and volunteering maybe front and centre of that, is to really think about what is our role as a convener, what is our role as the connector of the understanding of where the good work is, where the gaps are, how do we drive work in the gaps where they are important, and how do we also empower and support those organisations that are doing superb work. I read a brilliant report about volunteering within a very niche minority community group, and it was a great piece of work. It was a piece of academic research, only a very small piece, but really valuable. But the authors of that have no way to get that message out to a wider group. Well, we've got 17,000 members that we can get it out to. So for me, what is NCVO's role in that kind of coordination, network, driver, and of course then taking that into government in the terms of that bridge between the sector and government. And sometimes that's being in the tent, sometimes that's being outside the tent. It depends on what the topic is and what the best way to get the impact and result is we want. So for me, it's quite a long answer, but I think we've got a role to play across a number of topics in that space that are issues that really, really matter. Specifically to do with volunteering, I'm quite interested in thinking about this whole protections of the rights to volunteer and the protection of volunteering as a concept. So we've been, I think, probably aware, your listeners will be aware, we've just done a big piece on the settlement, stroke enforced volunteering, stroke outright slavery, depending on your view. But, I think that is a really clear space for NCVO. That is about eroding the concept of volunteering being for public benefit. It's about something that could be the start of the end of volunteering being about true altruistic and public good, is if we start to use it as a mechanism by which people get personal gain from their volunteering, it changes the nature of volunteering. And so actually just don't call it that. Just let's not try and pretend it's even in the volunteering space, because that is dangerous for volunteering. Now, for me, they are clear spaces that NCVO needs to be. We need to be fighting those battles about the protections of the rights of volunteering, the rights to meet in groups, regardless of your cause. It kind of feeds through to things like the rights to protest, the right to form a charity as a group of volunteers, the thinking about things like trustees and that as a voluntary role in the governance space. Is that sustainable going forward? Who wants to be a trustee if regulation continues to increase, and where will that leave us? So I think there's a big role for NCVO to play in the volunteering space. It might, we might be still supporting campaigns like the Big Help Out and the Big Lunch and GoVo and fantastic stuff going on, but we might be just a kind of multiplier of that message from other brilliant organisations like Catherine at RVS, superb work going on there. I think rather than duplicate that or try to fight in that space, NCVO now needs to really niche out what it is that we can do and add unique value to. And I think that's something about convening, and I think it's something about the protection of volunteering as a concept.
Yeah, but it's always music, I think, to our ears to hear people talking about convening rather than controlling. At the end of the day, NCVO is a membership organisation as well, isn't it? So, it makes sense to me that a large part of the organisation's role should be hearing the voices of its members, which I know from my days on the board at NCVO are incredibly diverse, not just in terms of the scope of the charities, but the size, from tiny to mega charities. But to bring those stories to the fore, obviously listen to them and make sure that those voices are fed into the priorities of the work and fed into the policy work you do with government and with others, but playing the role of highlighting, convening, bringing people to the fore rather than being the kind of sector, I wasn't going to say policeman, but that's not the right word, but giving out, this is the best practice. That's all important, but at the end of the day, the real aim you can do, there's lots of good stuff coming together, but someone who can shine a light on it, direct the right people towards those issues, just spark the conversation, enable the conversation to happen, been tremendously valuable.
I completely agree with that, Chris. I mean, the reality is NCVO isn't a volunteering organisation. We don't have huge numbers of volunteers. We can work with organisations that do to identify best practice. We can work with them to ensure that every organisation, every registered charity in England that's working with volunteers has access to great templates, training around requirements to do with volunteers, it's make it easy to work with volunteers. We can do that. I think NCVO has also got a place to play in what I keep calling brilliant basics, which is not maybe at the complex end of some of the volunteering debate, but just saying, if you're working with volunteers, here's the templates you need. Here's how you want to onboard. Here's some really good ideas on recruitment options. That all needs to be part of, for our membership, for their access to what I call like a brilliant basics package, because that's also, how do I do my governance? What do I need to think about for my people? Is there an example of a policy for annual leave? Right, brilliant basics. NCVO is great in that space. But over and above that, the reality is that we maybe aren't best placed to deliver a lot of this work on volunteering, because day in, day out, we don't have volunteers here. We have lots of people who've worked with volunteers, obviously myself included. What I want to see us doing is working with those organisations that are developing best practice. I did a session at Samaritan's meeting, their annual National Council meeting on Saturday, and I did a conversation talking about volunteering there and just kind of highlighting some of the trends. What does some of the evidence and data tell us? But actually what we're much better doing is helping amplify the story of some good practice going on there and some challenges they've got there, and how they're working through those challenges, and how do you do mass and complex change with large voluntary delivered organisations. Here's a case study. NCVO is much better in that space than thinking that we can write lots of this stuff from scratch.
I think one of the other brilliant spaces I've seen NCVO in recent years, I'd be interested in any insight on where this kind of stuff might go next, but it's really helping us know what's going on out there, if that makes sense. So that membership and connectedness and convening, I think for me naturally leans to, well, what is going on? And it feels like to me like the epitome of that, or the real like high point of that was the time well spent pieces of work, which time and time again, I still go back to this. Here's what a brilliant volunteer experience looks like. This was a brilliant piece of work, and I see and hear, my peers doing that all the time as well. I'm just really interested in your thoughts on that kind of work, and if there's any thoughts on where that might go in the future.
Yeah, I think at the moment, so we're working on our new strategy, and that'll be out in the very early summer, late spring, which will really clarify what I think the direction of travel is for NCVO. I think the reality is, as a membership organisation, as you've touched on, guys, is that we've got 17,000 members, and that's 17,000 different views, right, of what we should be doing, 17,000 different definitions of what success should look like for NCVO. And that's kind of fine. What I think we need to do is really start to clarify exactly what it is for people to say, this is what NCVO can do, this is what we can deliver in these different spaces. I'm really keen to explore what we can do in the space around data and evidence. Now, that might not be necessarily, I don't know, I think is what I'm partly saying on whether we'll be producing reports like that again in future on volunteering specifically. What I do know is we have access to huge quantities of data. We probably receive pretty much every report written in the sector by every think tank, every academic institution. I think by default, we're on the top of everyone's mailing list. So probably if there's one single library of most things written, we probably hold it here. And actually, us thinking about how we curate that and library that and can use generative AI to help people search it accurately and evidence, the data and information that they need from it. I think that's probably a really, really valuable role for NCVO. And whether you're wanting to search that data, even if it's existing reports into the future, maybe that's about data that comes out of our members. It could be a whole range of things. If you want to be able to search that on volunteering, if you want to be able to search that on a topic of interest to you, like maybe it's an impact measurement, maybe it's a how do I do question, I think the role of NCVO is to make sure that it's really easy for people to look at the volunteering data through whatever lens they're wanting to look at it through, whether that's very local community, national charity, through a very specific interested characteristic group. So that's the role of NCVO. So at the moment, I don't know what we'll produce in ourselves as much as what is our role in enabling other people to produce tons of this stuff.
It feels like that's applying that like convening mindset to research, data and insight, right? Again, isn't it? The answer doesn't necessarily need to be us doing all of this stuff. The answer is bringing together all the talent and skills and expertise that is already going on. Let's not reinvent the wheel, and let's make it as easy as possible for the people who need it and want it to access it, to search it and make it useful for them. That feels like a really big and significant mindset shift. And it's kind of probably how a lot of us might want to see that mindset shift around some of our volunteering as well, right? Is about how this isn't about always doing it for people or telling people what to do. It's bringing together, it's convening the skills and the talent and the good stuff that's going on already to enable more of that and maybe facilitate the conversations, right? Because the next logical step is, how do I go and speak to the person that has done this or experienced this? A bit like you were saying with Samaritans, right? It sounds like actually a much more
it's volunteering Wikipedia.
Yeah, I mean, the thing for me is, right, that like we're talking about volunteering today, and in this space, if you're wanting a report on volunteering and you love our report on volunteering and we produce one and that's what you wanted, it's great. But actually, if you're sat there wanting a report on how charities are responding to climate change or the sector's dependence on gift aid, right, then you're like, well, NCVO didn't produce that, and then NCVO is rubbish because they didn't produce the thing I want. So if the reality is we've got this membership, it's got very wide and varied need and a bigger stakeholder group than just our members, because we've got, government wanting that information, academic institutes wanting that information. Rather than us producing a single report, which everyone thinks is really valuable in the moment, but then there was 20,000 different reports we didn't produce, how do we actually think about taking a step back from that and thinking about what is the data and evidence that we want people to access accurately and well? We want to take out some of those wrinkles that we know AI can create, thinking about the problems with some of the algorithms, the inequality, the data corruption that can end up in some of that data, those data sets and that AI use. What is NCVO's role in, again, coordinating that space? We might not do it all ourselves, but how do we play a role in ensuring that everyone can get the report they want when they want it and need it, and it'll be as accurate as it can be? Is that a better, longer term, more strategic headline view of where NCVO should be heading than just to kind of plan to write a report on volunteering this month, a report on something next month? So it's just a different way of thinking about it. How do we move from direct delivery into maybe more convening? I keep talking about it being like, how do we energize this sector that at times is on its knees and in places is on its knees to really access all the incredible opportunities that are still out there, right, to transform? And that could be data, AI, mergers, impact economy, new methods of volunteering, corporate volunteering. Like, there are millions of opportunities still out there for our charities to be completely transformed and successful and innovate. But it's too complicated when you're absolutely exhausted. You're on your knees, you're living hand to mouth. You just got to get some services out on Friday again. And so, again, what's the role of NCVO in that energizing to just make that really easy? To just make it really easy to engage with AI, really easy to engage with the impact economy, new types of funding models, really easy to find out about new ways of volunteering and what's worked. So I think it's like really challenging ourselves to say, if we're a multiplier, if that's the advantage of NCVO, we are a multiplier. We sit in the centre with all these 17,000 and more spokes coming out from us. How do we make it? How do we use that to do something really powerful with it and to just make it as easy as possible for people to function, whatever the size of your organisation, whatever space you're in? And volunteering will always be a key part of that because it is a core part of civil society. Arguably, it's the bedrock of civil society. So it's always going to be in there, but I think it's probably more a sense of our future is working that way than producing some of those and encouraging others, partnering with others who want to produce stuff, helping connect people who want to produce volunteering research with philanthropists who want to pay for it. More in that space, probably.
Yeah. And that gives us a really good view on sort of the enabling and the convening both the information and the people with the information together and sparking all those conversations. I wonder, do you feel that NCVO also has a role to play in, to a degree, in a bit of a vision for the sector? I mean, I'm thinking obviously from volunteering point of view that every conversation I have every day with volunteering people and with charities is inspiring, and most of it is pretty exciting. But there still is quite a groundswell of stuff, probably because, as you described, Kate, people are so busy just spinning plates that it's quite hard to be creative. It's quite hard to really assimilate some of that sort of external data that's going on and realize that the world is changing around us. And it's quite hard, therefore, sometimes for volunteering bodies to be as innovative as perhaps you and I might want them to be. And sometimes, dare I say, it's sometimes quite hard for chief execs who are not just doing volunteering, they're doing lots of other things beside, to focus on the fact that world has changed. And I wonder, is there a sort of, in my head, I've got a kind of state of the nation. Is there a role for you and for NCVO into sort of saying, hey, these are the challenges that we're facing. This is what the data from all this convening we've been doing is telling us. And these are the things we really need to put our attention on. Or do you think it's more passive than that?
No, I think I'm going to answer that two ways, actually. Two different answers to that. I'm hoping I don't contradict my own self in the answer to this. The first is vision for the sector. I'm not convinced the sector needs a vision. I think the sector needs a vibe change. It needs a mood change. It needs positivity bred into it. It needs to be reminded how amazing it is. This sector has lost confidence because we have been on our knees a long time. And, we've taken a pummeling by the previous government. Changes. We've had limited access to voice for a long time. So I can understand all the reasons why, right? But we need to pick ourselves up, and that's hard to do. And we need, each charity chief exec in the UK needs the equivalent of that friend who's like, you've had such a rubbish time and you've had a lot, but come on now, come on now, where are we going next? So I think there's something, and it sounds a bit like woolly, but I think there's something about how do we stop the sector doom looping? How do we set the sector being on a downward spiral to the bottom? Because I keep saying to people, if we keep talking about chief exec burnout, if we keep saying it's endemic, it's terrible, like chief exec's horrible, who would want to do this job? Who would want to do this job? But, my kids aren't chomping at the bit to come into the UK voluntary sector because all they hear is how awful it is. Same as we've got that same issue in the NHS. Who are we encouraging to join? How are we promoting it, talking about it, talking ourselves up, making it positive? And actually, when I look at things like the impact economy and I talk to big business about why would you want to partner with us, they're like, well, you do tell us a lot how hard it is and you're all struggling. And are you a great partner? Have you really got headspace for innovation? You tell us constantly you haven't. So actually there's something about, whether it's manifesting, I don't know, Chris, I feel like I'm sounding very psychic in this podcast with you guys, but I don't know if it's manifesting our own future here, but it is about starting to step back into our own strength, right? Step back into our power as the UK voluntary sector and say, hey guys, right, how are we going to tackle some of this? And as diverse as the sector is, the solutions and innovation will be as diverse of that. It'll be two tiny little charities working together locally. It'll be some big nationals merging. It'll be a brand new model with a big corporate overseeing. So it'll be completely diverse. And I am totally confident that will happen. So I think there's kind of that aspect for me about the kind of vibe. And I think that probably lends itself, to that point about data and evidence and how do you just make it easy, because we don't half overcomplicate things as well. So, how do we make it easy for those charities that do want to innovate and have got, 20 minutes free on a Tuesday to think about innovation. How do we make it so simple that when you've only got 20 minutes on the train, you could just look at something that would give you that bit of inspiration? Like, it's quite hard. It's still quite hard in the sector to really understand how do you connect. Who are your networks? I've been talking to chief execs about finding their tribes. It's quite hard to do that. And NCVO could take a really crucial space in supporting some of that.
I'm always reminded of a story I was told about the sort of foundation of Silicon Valley, and how before Silicon Valley really took off, all the technical giants of America were all based around Boston and Massachusetts in their ivory towers, not talking to each other, holding their secrets really close to their chests for the sake of competitive advantage. And then in Silicon Valley, there was all these coders meeting in coffee shops, sharing ideas, sharing enthusiasm, and just building a vibe, almost as you describe. And the innovation was driven not through secret, but through people just sharing their enthusiasm for what they're doing and building off each other. And as you were speaking, it kind of reminded me of that. And wouldn't it be lovely if the sector was more Silicon Valley?
Yeah, I don't know if people have been to that NCVO building in central London. You can obviously rent rooms here and anytime you want. And great space. But
I can vouch for that, by the way.
Yeah,
I can vouch for that. We've done meetings there.
A little pitch there, a little
great cake, everything, brilliant.
I think so. But we're canal side, right? We're down this side of Regent's Canal, and I would love down that side of our building. I just want a massive sign that says "Revolutionaries welcome," because this building should be a crucible of space by which we start new revolutions and we come up with the ideas. And sometimes when I'm in this building that I'm in today, I just feel for a moment how many crazy decisions, ideas started in this building and are now big, well-functioning charities. And I think of those that are spun out of NCVO, like Citizens Advice, CAF, and others. But actually, 1 million conversations have gone on in this building that have started 1 million new ideas. Yeah. And I just think, like, as a sector, like, let's not forget that's what we're incredible at. And that space, we are survivors and the mother of invention, necessity. And I think that is where we are incredible in this space, better than any other sector.
That's where volunteering comes in, right? Because a lot of our charities that exist, big and small, they started because someone in a local community saw a need and they wanted to have their own revolution, right? They wanted their own revolution to make sure that thing wasn't a problem anymore, right? And was better and was addressed. And they brought other people with them, usually. And that grew and grew and grew and grew and grew over time, or is in the process of growing, or whatever. And I think that's, you're right to remind us of that, Kate, because it's so important. I think that piece about the sort of the vibe check, should we call it, is also an interesting one as well. Because I think like when you think about where that's gone well in the past, like when volunteering has had the spotlight on it and we've told the right stories and that's all come together, that people will come, right? And I know we can slightly doom monger about whether we made the most of these kind of opportunities, but I'll go back to the pandemic again. When we needed people to volunteer, when we cleared the decks and made it easy to volunteer, and there's a whole range of that, and that was a unique situation. But like my personal view, and I've talked about on this podcast many times, is like people want to volunteer, they want to get involved, like there is latent demand. We need to help them do that. And part of helping them doing that is telling the right story about volunteering and the impact it makes and making it easy for people to volunteer. And sometimes that's just getting out of the way, right? Sometimes that's getting out of the way and letting them have their revolutions. I think that's so important.
I think best practice to inspire new ideas is great. Best practice that's like everyone should be doing it this way is not always helpful, because everyone's operating in a slightly different context, a slightly different community. You need best practice to inspire you on some possible ideas that you can then adjust and tweak and change. And so I think there's loads of space for that in that kind of really positive and energized way. And, the solution to homelessness in the UK might not even be solved yet. It might come from some 19-year-old who just thinks, I wonder if I could go and volunteer for a shelter charity shop. And then while they're in there, happens to read something and think, wait, I know the answer. that's what we should remember, is that is what we are creating. We are creating an environment where the volunteers of the future become the social entrepreneurs of the future and become the solutions to our biggest and most complex problems. And as it has always been from when we were originally conceived back in Victorian times, where we all came from originally. So I can't lose hope. There's not an inch of me has lost any hope in the fact that we are incredible now, and we have the potential to be incredible for the next 100 years.
Seems like a good time to take a break for our sponsors. As a volunteer manager, you're asked to wear many hats. No doubt your inbox is overflowing. You're using tools that don't speak to each other. And quite frankly, more time than you'd like is spent on admin and manual tasks.
Voluntero exists for this exact reason. Voluntero helps volunteer managers bring all aspects of volunteer management into one easy-to-use, flexible system that can be molded to your exact needs. It is so much more than a database that sends out emails. It is an all-encompassing platform that empowers your volunteers to do more.
We hear amazing feedback from their clients that include the likes of the RAF Museum, the Royal Voluntary Service and Keach Hospice. So if you'd like to learn more, book a demo on their website, voluntero.org, or email them at hello@voluntero.org.
If volunteers power your organisation, here's something you'll want to hear. At Investing in Volunteers, we know great volunteering doesn't happen by accident. It happens when organisations commit to giving volunteers the very best experience, one that's safe, supportive, meaningful and genuinely impactful. That's why more than 1,000 organisations across the UK and Republic of Ireland have chosen Investing in Volunteers, the quality standard for good practice in volunteer management. Whether you're a CEO looking to build a stronger culture or a volunteer manager wanting to boost retention and engagement, working with your designated experienced assessor gives you a clear, practical framework whilst also upskilling your team. And the best bit is not about perfection. It's about learning, improving and showing your volunteers they truly matter. Earlier this year, Prostate Cancer UK achieved their 3rd award and said that going through the assessment has been a valuable and insightful experience, a great opportunity to reflect, learn and grow. So if volunteers are part of your vision, make Investing in Volunteers part of your strategy. Find out more and sign up for your free no obligation quote at investinginvolunteers.co.uk.
Kate, as you was talking, I couldn't help but first of all, I should plug a really fantastic read if anybody's really interested in the history of charities, because it is Justin Davis Smith's History of NCVO, which is well worth a read, and it absolutely explains some of the origin of some of the most well-known charities in the UK, which were spawned through NCVO's auspices and different guises over the years. So that's well worth a read. And also, I should say that I don't know if you've spoken to one of your former chairs, Martin Lewis, but his big thing was very much around the vibe around charities and the positivity and telling positive stories. So if you've not, that'd be a good conversation to have.
Very important.
I wanted to pick up on where you were in terms of bringing everybody together and capturing some of that innovation, the vibe that already exists in the sector. And obviously, I suppose, because of who we are around volunteering. And you talked about, bringing people together and capturing some of that and enabling them to talk to each other and share that intelligence and so on. And I just wondered where mutual aid fits into that, because they may not be members of NCVO, of course, but increasingly volunteering, and perhaps we saw it through the pandemic, is really coming out of communities, coming out of well-meaning people who just want to deal with an injustice, whatever that might be. And sometimes that doesn't even turn into an organisation. Maybe it's spontaneous, maybe it's short-lived, but there's such a groundswell of mutual aid as well. And I sense historically NCVO and probably the sector has not quite known how that relationship should work. I don't know if you've got a view on where that fits into this kind of convening role that you're talking about.
So I think we're going to, this is my personal view, and totally not evidence-based, but I think we're going to see a continuing swell of mutual aid. I think there's lots of things about the charity model, the registered charity model, that is, we've still got more registered charities charities registering with the Charity Commission than closing every year. So the sector is still growing in the terms of the registered charity model. But actually talking to think about my own daughter, she wanted, she was very frustrated about lots of flags going up in our village and wanted to do something about this. But her view was, I just want to do something. I want to bring some people together in the village to talk about why is this even necessary? If we want to celebrate our British heritage, is there a way of doing that doesn't feel so threatened to other people? I just want a conversation about this. I want to see if I can get a few people together via social media to do that, and then when it's done and it's over. And I don't want to continue with this. I don't want a charity. I don't want to set up something where we meet every week. I just want to do a thing. And for me, that is incredibly important civic action, right? That's really important civil space. I'm talking much more about NCVO, and you probably realize this a little bit more in this podcast, about NCVO's relationship to civil society rather than just the registered charity model. So that's because I think the registered charity model may have its limitations going forward in future. I think because of the opportunity to shape charity regulation, we run a bit of a risk that some aspects of charities might be quite vulnerable to governments who don't think some of our glorious charities should exist. We just saw a week or so ago an announcement that the Charity Commission is going to have slightly more rights to make a decision to close a charity. And that's probably right. It's an important safeguarding measure against charity structure being abused. But, there'll be new models emerge, the support of governance in charities. It's an expensive model to support if you're having to support a board of trustees, and then you have to start with a subcommittee, then you have to find a treasury. So we know that there's a lot about this model that means that actually we'll probably see a whole load of new emerging models in civil society space. And I do want to think about what the role is of NCVO in being able to support those organisations. Because as we just touched on earlier, one individual today might be the Macmillan of 20 years' time, right? Yeah. So how do we really support in that space? And I think that is a good challenge. So things like mutual aid, we just need to encourage people to care about their local communities, grassroots up, and that might be still setting up a local club, visiting a neighbour, and really being also really, really clear about what are the things that matter in that space. And for me, the main thing that matters is safeguarding, and that you think about the implications of safeguarding. But we overcomplicate it when we start saying, it's safeguarding, then you should register as a charity, because then you'd have got gift aid on that gift of £25, and then when you register as a charity you're going to need to get at least a couple of trustees, and then we kill what was somebody just wanting to set up a great little club to help some elderly people in the village with dementia, give their carers a break for an hour, right? And we kill it. So I think I love the mutual aid model as long as it's done safely and well. And I think there is a role to play in ensuring people do it safely and understand why it needs to be done safely. But I think these models are going to grow.
I think that's kind of a really interesting reflection. And some of that potentially also links us back to volunteering, right? Which is about how to make things as easy and frictionless as possible, because all of that stuff is friction, right? All of that stuff, its ultimate end point is it's harder to get involved, it's harder to volunteer, it's harder to do the things you need to do. And I'm absolutely with you, Kate. It's got to be safe and it's got to be legal, right? Yeah. But there's got to be a better way of having that than without putting all the friction in the way that we often find ourselves doing. You think there's some sort of modern organizations have developed in the sort of the digital age that their model, it sort of seems to have really interestingly bypassed a lot of that friction. Now, it's not to say they've not got sort of charitable structures or anything, but I think, for example, of Parkrun is my most obvious one. That started as one person with a group of friends in a park doing something. Now it's a global movement, right? And famous for its ability to really involve volunteers in a very frictionless way, sort of thing, because my personal view, because of how that organization has developed to maintain almost what's most important to it, which is almost about how it started, and it hasn't had to put all those things in the way. And maybe that links back to being a cheerleader in a very circular way, like for NCVOs, helping us, or cheering for us when, to help move some of these things out of the way from us. And highlighting those things as well.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's probably easier if you're establishing a new organization to think about how do you have the least possible set of kind of frictions. That's a great way to describe it in your volunteering model. I think it's often harder when you're an established organization, your work is maybe slightly higher risk. You've got a board of trustees sitting over that looking at the risk. I remember an excellent debate when I was at Young Lives versus Cancer, when we were talking about how much risk we were prepared to take in safeguarding. And I know that sounds crazy, and we had a policy zero tolerance. And one of our very, very experienced qualified social workers said, if we have an absolutely zero tolerance issue, I wouldn't be allowing, say, 18 or 19-year-olds to maybe go for a drink. Right, they're legally allowed to, but I wouldn't ever be allowing that. Not a mixed age group, but an older adult group. Young Lives versus Cancer work with up to 25-year-olds. And she was like, if I don't allow that, what I'm starting to do is not allow young people with cancer to live the same kind of lives that they would be living if they didn't have cancer. And so almost by default, and it was a good challenge back to us about, so what are we doing here? She was like, if we are trying to ensure that children with cancer live as normal a life as possible, that they're accessing everything that their peers are accessing, that they're not losing out as a result of their cancer diagnosis, should we be putting in a whole load of restrictions, or should we actually be mitigating for the risk as much as possible, but accepting that we have a role to play in supporting these young people to live, a life that 18-year-olds live, which has some risk in it? And working with their parents on that, working with them as young adults in that space. And so it was really interesting then thinking so what does that mean for working in volunteering? How do you do that but still keep the organisation safe? Our trustees are volunteers. They're not qualified social workers being paid to be trustees to make some of those complex decisions. So I think what I'm saying is, I'm just using that as an example, is some of this is quite tough, right? And when you've done it this way forever, stepping back and saying, actually, should we take some of these frictions out? That feels quite frightening. And for volunteers and trustees particularly, that could feel quite frightening. So how do we challenge each other on that as well? Where are there organisations that are new that say, actually, we haven't got that factor in our volunteering recruitment process, and here's the evidence of how many times that's been a risk in this organisation. We don't take 2 references, we take 1. How many times has that been a risk? And try to use more of the evidence to drive the decision-making around some of those frictions.
It's interesting to use one of your examples earlier on about solving homelessness. The truth is probably it's going to be a whole range. It's not going to be one organisation or one person that solves homelessness. It's going to come from collaboration, and it probably won't happen universally. It will happen in local communities, and local communities one by one, perhaps with the sort of including the sort of thing you described about your daughter trying to put something together in a local community on a sporadic kind of basis. It's those kind of things that are going to probably turn the dial on some of those growing but intransitable sort of problems and challenges that we face in society. So it's good to hear that you're sort of thinking in those ways. I just wondered how that sort of plays out. I suppose I'm thinking mostly across the 4 nations, and across the rest of the infrastructure. So in volunteering, we've got association volunteer managers, there are other bodies as well. How we collectively play that sort of convening role, I suppose, and maybe internationally as well, because I don't know if you're connected with IAVE, the International Association of Volunteering. I love their stuff because it reminds me there's a whole world of volunteering out there which we often miss in the UK. What can we learn from Africa? What can we learn from Asia? What can we learn from South America, North America, whatever? And I suppose, I'd be interested in your thoughts, and maybe it's going to be more of the same, but how NCVO kind of fits in that, but also plays an active role in just helping that ecosystem sort of thrive, I suppose.
Yeah, I just think a little bit like I've said, because I think my view is that that's not from a top-down, controlling, trying to herd the cats approach. It doesn't work, because our vibrancy and our difference on a local level, the difference between those organisations. Now, I'm not saying there's not too many. I'm not saying that some organisations would be more financially sustainable if they merged, or the kind of complexity, but also their difference in that space, the uniqueness, the tailored expertise they bring in that space is also incredibly valuable, right? So sometimes we shouldn't herd the cats. We should just try to limit the size of the room. I just think it's We just need some different approaches to this. And one of the big things is, how do we use new technology, particularly really of significant interest to me, to really drive communication so that people know what's going on. That people will never know everything going on in this sector. It's absolutely massive. It's huge. People have talked to me about the Covenant Council and said, Kate, the responsibility of the Government Civil Society Covenant Council is to make sure that government works well with civil society. And I'm like, right, so you think I can ensure with a group of 12 people, the whole of government is working well with the whole of civil society, neither of which are homogenous groups of things. It's like, what we can do is try to encourage that approach, build confidence in those partners to work together, build understanding of those partners, and then partly trust that they will go and do that. It's just, you need that kind of big picture helicopter view of the small interactions, the levers you can pull to improve the environment by which people do what they do, that we don't actually try to control it. It just isn't controllable. So how do we make sure that those voluntary organisations are working together? How do we make sure that their information is accessible? How do we promote the fact they even exist? And I think it's just keep going in that space. So some of the things I've talked about, that's about access to data, evidence, our networking events. We've been thinking today about a range of kind of summit events and in conversation events where we're just letting people talk about what they're doing in a space so that people can go off after that meeting and make their own connections, right? I can't do it all for you. We're too little. We're not very big. Everyone thinks NCVO is some massive, great beast. We're not absolutely huge.
It sounds like just leaning into being a member organisation, right? Like the roots of what it is, like being a really great membership organisation, to me at least, is about bringing members together to kind of make the magic happen in some respects, right? You can take that further, but if you start by we're a membership organisation, the value is in our members coming together, and a lot can flow from that, can't it? How do we make those people come together and bring together the shared expertise and the shared participation within that group?
Yeah, absolutely.
Again, similar to what we're trying to do with volunteers, right?
Exactly. And I should obviously add that you've got to be in to win. So if your NCVO membership isn't up to date, guys, get on the website. The other thing is, I hear lots of volunteer organisations go like, oh, well, we didn't know that was happening. We were never told. I'm like, are you a member of NCVO? Are you a member of Akivo? Do you open our newsletter? They're like, no, we haven't got time. I'm like, oh, well, that's why you don't know what's going on, because I cannot follow you home on the bus reading out newsletters behind each and every one of you. So some people would like me to. Well, they probably wouldn't. Actually, that would be weird for them.
You need a podcast, Kate. That's what you need.
Yeah, that's what you need.
So you can podcast so you can read them out. That's the...
They can listen on the bus on the way home. So I suppose good point to ask, well, you've already hinted with your strategy, but what's next? What should we be looking forward to hearing from Kate Lee and from NCVO in the next few months?
Well, a couple of big things, I suppose. The Covenant Council is going to be announced relatively soon. So that's the council that is being set up by 10 Downing Street in order to better coordinate. And it's not just the council, it's going to be a team also based in 10 Downing Street to better coordinate the relationship between government and civil society, which is very exciting. And I've been asked to chair that council. So a little bit seat in my pants trying to work out how to do that, but that'll be great fun. And the other and incredibly important thing that you need to, everyone, all your listeners need to not only look out for, but go right now and look at the website and join, is our amazing Million Acts of Hope campaign, which is a campaign that's going to build up to a week of action on the 13th to the 20th of May, which is just reminding us why civil society is so incredible. 1 million acts of hope going on every single day. This is not broken Britain. The majority of people in the UK are very happy to support their neighbours. They want to volunteer. They want to make it better. They want to do all the things that you're talking about. They're busy volunteering, donating to charity shops, giving blood, doing whatever they want to just for the benefit of everyone around them. And we need to fight back this awful narrative that this country is broken and divisive, the anger, the hate, in the best way this sector can, which is not with a party political position, but just a reminder of the brilliance of what actually everyone is doing all day, every day across the UK. and we are incredibly proud of. We facilitate a lot of it, but like we've said, and things like mutual aid and mutual action, some of it we don't facilitate. Who cares? People are just out there actually loving their communities, loving their neighbourhoods, loving their causes, donating, making a will and leaving a gift. Who knows what they're up to? But that is going on all day, every day in this country. And if it was true that we all hate our neighbours, we are all polarised, this divisive suggestion, this narrative that that's how it is in the UK, the reality is that that wouldn't be going on, and it is. So we want to celebrate that loud and proud. I keep calling this the year of the fight back. I need to push back on some of that narrative that nobody cares anymore. Actually, millions of people do care every single day through their voluntary actions. They do care. And there is a website, Million Acts of Hope. .org. So go and have a little look for more information. It's not party political. There's going to be loads of advice and guidance about what you can do. How do you talk to your boards about getting involved? And, we'd like literally thousands of our incredible organisations shouting loud and proud, 13th to the 20th of May. We want to create a different story for the UK media to promote about actually how incredible it is to be here and to live here and to be part of our local communities. We need a different narrative. We need to give them a new story. And that's what we're hoping everybody pulls together and does. It's just brilliant.
And what a great note to end the podcast on, that call to action for everybody to get involved. So thank you for joining us, Kate, sharing some of your philosophy so early into your NCVO tenure that I'm sure some of it's still in the formation phase or not been agreed with your board.
You get me back in a year, I'll say this was all rubbish.
No. And lovely. Well, maybe you should come back in a year and tell us how you're getting on.
Very happy to do that.
Thanks, Kate.
Take care, guys. Thank you.
Brilliant. Wow, Matt, what a fascinating conversation. I really enjoyed that. It was just great to hear Kate's vision, but actually the passion for the sector was really encouraging.
Wow, Kate is certainly a breath of fresh air, isn't she? For me, lots of really exciting thinking and lots of things I really strongly agree with, actually. I think this kind of optimism about the fact that people want to be involved and people are being involved and there's loads of brilliant stuff already going on that we need to talk about more is a really important point when it comes to volunteering. And I think it can sometimes be easy for us. I consider myself guilty of this as a sort of professional involved in volunteering sometimes to do things like, look at community life survey, look at the numbers of people volunteering and feel like the story to tell is one of challenge. And yes, there are challenges out there, but look how those challenges are being overcome. And look at the impact that is being made by volunteers and civil society, basically everywhere you look, right? And if the story that we tell is a graph pointing downwards, that is the wrong story to be telling. But I'm really encouraged by the notion that this feels like a really participatory solution to this. It feels like a really citizen-centric solution to this, which is NCVO as a membership organisation bringing its members together to share from each other, to learn from each other, to take the best of what each other are doing, and importantly, tell a story together as civil society about the difference that is being made, and with volunteering and the actions of volunteers being a key part of that. That's really exciting to me, and I'm really excited to see what happens next.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I suppose the cynic could say we didn't talk an awful lot about volunteering, but in a way we did. But we talked about it in the context of organisations, of charities. And in a way, that's also quite refreshing because, it's very easy to get kind of siloed about this is volunteering, this is fundraising, this is something else. But actually, I got the impression that Kate looked at this, as she should in her role, I suppose, very holistically, and about people making a difference in local communities and in national communities.
It's easy on a volunteering podcast, isn't it, sometimes to see volunteering as a sort of means to an end in itself. And yeah, we can talk about the dual benefit of volunteering. We can talk about volunteering being sort of transactional and things for a volunteer. But volunteering doesn't exist in a vacuum, does it? It exists as part of society. And as we touched on in the podcast, so many important parts of society absolutely depend on volunteers, on people giving their time. And crucial.
I really enjoyed her answer to our conversation around mutual aid. That really struck a chord with me. Just recognising that some of the structures around charity, governance, and the way we do things, sometimes our risk appetite, I guess, is what she was getting at, gets in the way of just enabling people to do things, to give their time, to solve things in their community. A common theme for us on this podcast, Matt. But I quite liked hearing that from Kate. You know, the story she gave about her daughter just wanting to make some changes in the local community, get some people together to change the narrative around flags in a local community, I thought was really encouraging, really refreshing. And if she's successful in her thinking about just changing NCVO into a convener and just bringing those conversations together, then I think NCVO is probably in a really got a really good, hopeful future ahead of it,
sure.
as a sector.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Kate. Brilliant to speak to you. And hopefully she comes back to, a little bit again in the future and we can talk about how she's getting on.
Yeah, for sure. So if you enjoyed this podcast, which I'm sure you did, you got to the end, then please obviously give us a like and some comments. But most importantly, as I say, every episode, please do tell at least one other person about the podcast so they can benefit too. But for now, thanks, Matt.
Thanks, Chris. Bye-bye.
See you in the next one. Hi everyone, Chris Wade here again. I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Kate as much as Matt and I did. I just wanted to pop on the end of the podcast just to remind everybody that Time for Impact doesn't just facilitate great conversations in the podcast format. We do provide consultancy, training, and many tools for your continued development in your volunteering strategy work. I wanted to mention, particular in this episode, that we are actively recruiting lots of charities onto our comparative volunteer experience survey. So do get in touch if you'd like us to help survey your volunteers to check that they're happy and that they are getting what they hope to get from their volunteering experience. So not only that you get a score, but later on in the year, so that you can compare your volunteers' experience with the rest of the sector to see how you compare. All the information is on our website. You know where to find us. Please get in touch. I'd love to have a conversation and talk you through the model if you're interested. Bye for now.